Hi everybody, thanks for coming out to today's Brown Bag Lunch and Learn. We're going to go over evaluations since the evaluation period is upcoming. So Nick, I'll invite you up to do your thing.
No announcements? No?
Oh, Diego's out sick, so that's why he's not here.
And where's Don Maria?
Don is down in Long Beach at the bargaining table with the chancellor's people, so he's doing the good fight. And no other announcements.
Yeah, we have the good fortune of having a East Bay employee representing us on the bargaining team this year, Don Moreno representing Unit 5. They are finishing up a 3-day interest-based training with the Chancellor's Office and with our bargaining team. This is a new approach that the Chancellor's Office suggested. Right? It's if you get into the different styles of bargaining, I'm a big fan of opposition bargaining, right? Recognizing up front that the union has different interests than the employer, right? Because in general, the employer wants to be able to have the flexibility to do what they want, to have more rights, and to pay their employees as little as possible to retain them. But they've got budget concerns. We don't have budget concerns. That's their job. Our interest is to gain more rights for our members and to get the best pay and benefits package as possible. But we'll see. The interest-based bargaining that they're doing, this training, it may work, it may not. We thought, hey, if the Chancellor's Office is going to invite us and pay for it, we'll go take a look and see what happens. So that's where they are. They have not started the true bargaining, that is exchanging proposals, as of yet. This is their first meeting. Today's the third day. Another announcement, some of you may have seen via text or via email alerts or on the website, we just settled a large class action unfair labor practice charge we had filed against the CSU regarding IRP requests. Over the last couple of years, they meaning the Chancellor, the CSU, has denied a number of equity-based IRP requests, kind of seemingly out of hand, with very little documentation to back up why they were denying the request. The contract clearly states they have to give a reason. In the past, they had given a whole rundown of, well, we look at your wage and we compare that to people in the same classification at this campus and at other similar campuses. We would often disagree with their denials based on the information, but at least they gave us information to let us know where they were coming from. They stopped doing that. We filed a big class action unfair labor practice charge. So now part of the settlement is that if you were denied since, Mary, do you remember when, sometime in 2018? Mm-hmm. Between 2018 and now, you can resubmit under the new parameters. So we're encouraging folks to do that. There's a whole section on the website about it. You can read on how to resubmit, kind of the pointers, and we'll get that underway. So that's good news.
We get one more year. It's actually 2017.
Oh, 2017. Right. Okay. So let's get started on performance evaluations. I'm doing kind of a mishmash of an older presentation I used to get and one that Mary had come up with, which has some good pointers. We'll get started right away by talking about what evaluations are. I think it's important to keep in mind any evaluation is a subjective measure of your performance, right? It's someone else's opinion of how well you do your work, what your strengths are, what your weaknesses are. With that in mind, I would recommend to anybody to not let an evaluator have so much power over you that you're losing sleep, or that it's hard to not take criticism personally, but please keep in mind there is no objective analysis being done when it comes to performance evaluations, which then means that it's open to unfairness and bias. Right? So we're going to talk about how to navigate through this whole process, trying to limit bias and limit prejudice in your evaluation where you think it exists, and coming out at the other end of it with something that is more fair. What do evaluations do in terms of how do they affect your career or your job? They don't affect you. Historically, we've gotten pay increases every year through negotiations called the GSI, the General Salary Increase. Regardless of someone's performance evaluation, whether they exceeded expectations or met expectations, or in some cases even did not meet expectations on any one particular evaluation, they did not affect your pay increase. Everybody got the 3% across the board. However, there is another way to get a raise, and that is the IRP, the in-range progression. And there are different criteria you can use when you make that request, one of which is performance-based. You can submit a request for an IRP and say, hey, look at my past 5 years of work, glowing evaluations. I think I should get a little bit of a raise here, right? So your evaluations can affect you in that situation, in that performance-based request for an IRP. Again, going back to our bargaining, if all goes well and we're successful in achieving steps in the contract, IRPs essentially go away, right? We no longer have to go to the boss and beg for a raise and hope, cross our fingers and hope we get it. It is based on our years of service. The language that was in our bill, the STEPS bill, mirrors the language that's in every other state of California employees' STEPS scheme, and that is you could potentially not be given a step increase if your evaluation does not meet expectations. Right? You have to at least meet expectations to be able to get your step increase. We're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves because we have yet to achieve steps, but just letting you know down the road that evaluation process could have an effect on a step increase. Now, a lot of folks have said, well, wouldn't that just incentivize the manager to evaluate everybody at, does not meet expectations? Potentially they could, but I think they'd have a hard time justifying, looking at the previous years, everybody was meets or exceeds, and all of a sudden you have a huge number of not meeting. That's not going to fly. And then the alternative is what we have now, right, which is IRPs. What is the success rate with IRPs? Not very high, right? Most get denied. So we'd be flipping that system in which most get denied to a step system which most will be getting an increase through the step system. Evaluations do become part of your personnel file, so they go in to that file that sits in the electronic records in HR, and the evaluations should be an evaluation on your current job description, right? So we know that many folks at the CSU started 10 years ago, 20 years ago, and through time their job has evolved. They've taken on new tasks. They don't do tasks that they used to do. If you looked at their original job description and compared to what they do now, 10, 20 years later, it could be very different. So it's important that your PD, your position description, which you're being evaluated on, is it meshes with your evaluation, right? So oftentimes we see during the evaluation process people's PDs being updated because as they look at the evaluation, they say, hey, wait a minute, everything that you're evaluating me on, it does not match up with my PD. So that could be an issue. What evaluations are not, they're not intended to be discipline, although sometimes it can feel like discipline, particularly if a manager gives you a very critical review or a review that you feel is unfair or not constructive. It can feel like they're really jabbing at you. That's a form of discipline. And again, opposite of subjective is objective. We got to keep in mind this is not particularly an objective process, right? That someone else's value. I know some folks who rarely see their manager or the administrator. They do their job, they do it well. Maybe the nature of their job is such that they're all over the campus, the manager is in an office somewhere, right? Is that manager really able to give an objective and fair and complete evaluation of that work? Maybe not in that case. When are evaluations done? How many folks here have not had an evaluation every year? Like some years have been skipped. A couple folks. Most people have had an evaluation every year. It's interesting to see at different campuses and in different departments. I've met folks that just say, I've been here 10 years, I've never gotten an evaluation. Or maybe the first year and then never since. Some folks get an evaluation every year. By the contract, it says the manager will evaluate employees every year, right? And generally, as Mary said, the evaluation period is coming up. The end of the school year, usually done
May, June.
May and June. That's common throughout the CSU, have that same period. So it happens once a year. An important thing to remember about that is that it's an evaluation. An annual evaluation means there's an evaluation period of 12 months, 1 year. So if you did not receive an evaluation for a few years, our position, and this has been backed up somewhat in arbitration disputes, our position, the union's position is they missed the opportunity. And so one can only assume that you at least met expectations for that year that you were not evaluated. And what that means in practice is that if you weren't evaluated for 3 years, it's now 2020, and your manager sits you down and gives you a document that says, in 2018, you really messed some things up, so I'm lowering your score, and I'm saying you do not meet expectations in this area, right? This is an annual evaluation with an annual 12-month period. They're going outside of that. You can't not evaluate someone for years at a time and then reach back 3 years ago, 2 years ago, and say, hey, by the way, we're going to throw this in here and criticize you about it, right? They should keep it to the 12 months. Now, obviously, if you were in that scenario, but the evaluation was very positive, you're probably not going to say anything. Well, I'll take that. I'll take the praise, even though I'm not going to make a point of coming into my manager's office and saying, hey, you said something really great about me that I did 3 years ago. I want that out of there because I want to, it's a way for you to be able to protect yourself from stuff piling up, basically, for unevaluated years, and then all of a sudden appearing in your evaluation. Did you have a question back there? Or were you just scratching it in? Probationary employees. When folks, even permanent folks, get hired, they have a 12-month probationary period, and the contract says they'll be evaluated 3 times during that 12 months, the 3rd, 6th, and the 11th months. Again, some managers don't evaluate on the 3, 6, and 11. And right before they make permanent status, the manager says, you know what, you're not working out, I'm going to let you go. Thinking that they're probationary. I don't have to have cause. I don't have to go to the state personnel board and fight with the union about me letting this person go. Well, if they didn't do these evaluations, not so fast. Contract says that if they are to be rejected from probation, the union can't do anything about it unless the evaluation process was not followed. And the intent of that is, if you have a new employee, it's on the job, you need to give them feedback and tell them, hey, this stuff you're doing here, this was really great, this stuff, you need to change this, you need to improve this, right? To give them the feedback they need to succeed in their job and to make permanent status. It would be unfair for managers just to have a new employee working, never really give them feedback, and then on the 11th or 12th month say, it's not working out, goodbye, right? So a smart manager, if they really know that someone's not working out, they're going to give them their evaluations, because then there's nothing that an employee or the union can do to challenge them being let go. Temporary employees. We have a number of temporary employees on campus. These are folks that are hired for a short-term appointment, no longer than a year at a time. We do have some folks who are temporary in name only, who have been here 5 years, 6 years, 7 years. Technically, per the contract, they're permanent, because after 4 years, they automatically become permanent. But these are the folks that get a letter that say, hey, congratulations, you've been hired, your appointment starts now and it ends on February 20th of 2021, right? And then maybe they'll get a letter at the end of that period saying, hey, congratulations, we've given you another year appointment. They're supposed to be evaluated at periodic intervals. Who knows what that means, right? Some managers just lump them into the group with all the permanent employees and just do it all at once and do an annual evaluation, but there's no hard and fast time frame for those folks. This is important, and it's also been changed from the previous contract. This is our new contract, the beige book. If any of you have the blue book, still sitting around, it's old, and this article, Article 10 that we're talking about, there's been some substantial changes to that based on the last round of bargaining 3 years ago. One of which is who can evaluate you. So the person who actually writes the meat of the evaluation still can be an administrator, which is another word for a manager or a supervisor, someone with true managerial authority, meaning, you know, if you're a real manager, you have the power to hire someone, to fire someone, discipline them, approve or deny vacations. That's a true manager, and they are not in the union. We have, not just on East Bay, but throughout the CSU system, folks who are leads or coordinators who are still in the bargaining unit, that sometimes act like managers, but they're not real managers, because they don't have that authority to hire and fire or to discipline. It used to be that sometimes those folks who were in the bargaining unit that were given the task of evaluating the employees, right? You're the lead, you evaluate. So we had situations in which the lead was writing the eval and then was calling in the employees and sitting across the table and saying, oh, here's your evaluation, you have an amount of time to review it, and if you want to dispute it, then we can have a meeting, and then we can have another meeting with the boss and with the union. And so we ended up with a situation in which union members were sitting across from the table from each other in a sometimes adversarial situation. We wanted to change that. We didn't want that situation to happen any longer. So in terms of actually maybe writing or providing input, a lead or a bargaining unit supervisor or a coordinator still can provide input, maybe even sometimes draft the evaluation for the manager, but then their job is done. They should not be in any subsequent meetings, any input meetings, because again, we don't want that situation where we have union members sitting across the table from each other in an adversarial environment. Contract says that whoever's doing your evaluation should be familiar with your regular work duties and performance. Sometimes you get a new boss that gets hired just before your evaluation time. Do you have a right to say, this person can't evaluate me because they just started. They're not familiar with my regular work duties and performance? Anybody think they can use that as a way to block this person? You could. You could. There's no hard and fast rule. If you get a sense that this person really doesn't like you, then maybe you want to use that argument, saying, hey, you're 30 days on the job. How can you evaluate my last 12 months? Right? We have had situations where the outgoing manager left just before the evaluation, but they're still on campus in another position. And the university says, oh, we think this person was around for that most of that 12 months. They're going to do the evaluation. And if that relationship was bad between our member and our manager, we might make the argument that, hey, that's not the manager anymore. It's inappropriate for them to be doing the evaluation. So it all depends on the situation. Just like for folks, if you have evaluation time comes and goes and your manager has not given you an evaluation and you and your manager do not get along, you're constantly fighting, there's bad blood, it's kind of a toxic relationship, I wouldn't necessarily be pulling out the contract and saying, hey, I want my evaluation, right? Because remember, if they miss the opportunity to give that evaluation, 6 months later we can say, okay, if you didn't give me an evaluation, I can only assume I met expectations, right? Which is probably a better evaluation than you would get than if you demanded to have that evaluation and that manager who has that bad relationship with you just crucifies you in that document. Right? So it's all, use your best instincts in terms of what will be the best outcome for you. So again, that third bullet point, only the appropriate administrator is to meet to present the evaluation and consider input. Again, the lead could have input or it can draft it for the boss, the real boss, the manager, but that's it. They're not involved in any of the subsequent things that happen in the process. So what should evaluations include? It's going to include just the regular stuff, the day-to-day assessment of how you do your work. Are you efficient? Are you a strategic thinker? All the things that they're looking for in terms of your work. But one thing that we pulled out of the contract that's in Article 10.5, which we think is important to look for, is it should include changes affecting your position or your workload that have occurred since your last evaluation. That is, if in the last 12 months you've taken on a whole number of projects that are new, you've been given more work, maybe different duties. Again, like I said, our jobs evolve over time. If it's significantly different from your job a year prior, you want to make sure that that is codified in your evaluation. One way that can be helpful is, let's say eventually your job is changing to a point where a new classification down the road may be appropriate, right? Either a higher skill level in the series or an entirely different classification. If you've got that in writing that your manager is assessing you and evaluating you on those skills in your request for a classification review, you can point to that as evidence saying, management knows I'm doing this. It's here in my evaluation. Right, so that's a benefit of having that included. What should evaluations not include? The in a layman's term, or the short answer is there should not be any surprises. The contract is not going to say no surprises in your evaluations, but it does say that if you are deficient in your performance, or you're doing things wrong, or you did some bad things, that the appropriate administrator, the boss, the person with managerial authority, should be counseling you on that and before it shows up in your evaluation, right? So let's say I'm Mary's boss, and there's a part in the evaluation that talks about punctuality and timeliness and attendance, right? If she goes through a rough patch in her personal life in August, she she's late a bunch of times, maybe she's got a couple questionable sick calls, we suspect some abuse of that, right? But then it just stops. I never say anything to her about it. September comes, October, November, and she's back on track. She's showing up on time. She's not taking any sick calls, right? For me to then come in the evaluation period and really go after Mary, saying, you know what, your attendance was crap last August, I'm marking you down as unacceptable, blah, 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 right? The time for the manager to address that situation was when it was happening, right? Not 10 months down the road, 11 months down the road. It shouldn't be a surprise. Like, Mary probably has forgotten all about her terrible month of August. She's back on track. It's behind her. It shouldn't be showing up then in June in an evaluation. And why this is really important is it may not seem like a big thing for just that issue. Sometimes managers can let things accumulate, multiple issues accumulate, and then slam people over the head come evaluation time. Saying, hey, you know, I've never said anything to you all year, but I want to point out that you did A terribly, you did a bad job at B, at C you really screwed up, all the way to X, Y, and Z, right? That's not fair. That's not a fair evaluation to stay silent and then surprise people later on with the evaluation. So here's how you can affect your evaluation or have some influence on it. Some managers will, before they start doing their evaluation, ask employees to fill out a self-evaluation form. I don't know how usual that is at East Bay. I know at San Francisco they started to do it a lot. Some of our members were like, screw that, that's management's job. I'm not doing their job for them because they're just going to take my self-eval and make it my evaluation. In response, we said, what's wrong with that? You write your own evaluation, it sounds pretty good to me, right? So it's up to you if you want to complete the self-evaluation form. I think it's probably in your interest to do so. So when your evaluator or when your administrator has written your evaluation, it is still a draft until we get to the end of the process. So in no situation should a manager walk by your desk and throw a piece of paper on the table and say, here's your evaluation, sign it and give it back to me by the end of the day. No, it's a draft. You have 10 days to read it, to think about it, figure out, research, maybe they're referencing something like, what the heck is this? I don't remember this, and like looking it up, figuring out how you want to have your input added to the evaluation. 10 days to do that. If the 10 days go by and you don't say anything to your manager, it's going to be considered uncontested and it's going to go in your personnel file. If during the 10 days you do decide you want to have a discussion about it, maybe ask for it to be amended, you can ask your evaluator or ask your boss, your manager, hey, I'd like to have a meeting to discuss my performance evaluation, right? And so then you meet with the boss. Again, not the lead, not the coordinator, but you're meeting with the boss, and you get to bring a union steward, a rep, someone with you to that meeting, if you want to. You don't have to, but if you want to. And you go in and you say, hey, I think this is unfair, or I think I would like this to be reworded, or blah, blah, blah. You have that discussion. And then, and only then, does, after that period of input happens, does your evaluation become final. Something that's missing in there, maybe it's in the next thing. Okay, it's in the next thing. If you're given your draft, and you within the 10 days you say, I want to meet about this, the manager can't stall you. They have to meet with you within 7 days of the request. So one thing that we hear sometimes is when someone gets a really bad evaluation or something that they think is not fair, they say, I want to file a grievance. This is crap. My manager is lying, and I can prove it. Right? Specifically, explicitly in the contract, it says you can't file a grievance based on the content of the evaluation. Right? Again, because I think both parties agree it's a very subjective and not objective process. Right? So, in a we file a grievance on a contract violation. Did the employer violate Article 6.5? Right? Usually it's pretty clear cut, sometimes not so clear cut, but in an evaluation, definitely not clear cut. Because what is the violation? What is the remedy? Right? So the content isn't grievable. The process is, however. Let's say your manager did come to you and say, here's your eval, sign it and give it to me. And you say, no, I want to look at it, and maybe I want to have a meeting with you to discuss it. And they say, no, that's it, that's final. Sign it, I'm putting it in your file at the end of the day. You can file a grievance on that because they're not following the process. Right? Again, the content not grievable, but the process is. So the third bullet point there is if you've had your meeting with the boss, you had your union rep there, you had all your information, and the boss is just not having it, he's saying, nah, nothing you've said is compelling, I don't agree with you, I think well, my evaluation of you is fair, I'm going to put it in your personnel file. What recourse do you have? The final piece of recourse you have is in Article 10.12, which is you can file a rebuttal. You can put all the documentation that you've prepared in your defense or to provide input for that performance evaluation, put it in a document, and it has to go into your file as basically an addendum to your performance evaluation. So your input gets in there somehow. It may not be in the way that the manager says it, but in your rebuttal, it accompanies your personnel file. This part, there's no timeline. Remember the 10 days aspect, saying here's your thing, you have 10 days to think about it and request a meeting. And then when you request a meeting, the manager has 7 days to meet with you. And then if they tell you it's still going in your file, you want to put a rebuttal in, there's no deadline. You could take 30 days, you could take 2 months. It's going to be kind of weird if you come 2 years later and say, hey, here's my rebuttal from 2018, I want to put it in. We might have management objecting, but technically there's no deadline. All right, did you?
Do you have to sign the eval at that point? Sign for the employee to sign, because if you sign it, that means you agree.
Okay, so a question about signing. If you've done your 10-day review and you request a meeting and it was 7 days, and your manager says, I'm still putting this in, you need to sign it, right? Signing is never an agreement. It's not. It's a confirmation of receipt, right? So, having said that, sometimes I've had employees or members write receipt only, or I do not agree with this, and sign it. I'm signing only to show that I've received a copy. Some say I don't want to sign it at all, which is fine. You don't have to sign it. Right? The manager can't make you sign it. What they may do is write on there saying, I gave this to Art on this date, and he has seen it. Right? And then they'll put it in the file. So that's true of any document. Even if you give you a notice of a letter of reprimand, a notice that they want to suspend you or even terminate you, if they ask for your signature, you do not waive your right to challenge that document. Right? It's only a confirmation of receipt. And again, that being said, you don't have to sign it either. If you're like, screw you, this is BS, I'm not signing this, they can't go after you for not signing. They can't force you to sign. And this is where we switch over. How are we doing in time? 12:30. We're going to Mary's part of the presentation. Some tips on meeting with your evaluator. And again, we should probably say / administrator. Because remember, the evaluator could be someone different than your administrator. Just the person that's meeting with you is your boss. The evaluator could be a lead. So before the meeting, gather copies of your prior performance evaluations and current position descriptions. This is particularly if you get dinged in some area where there was really, in your view, there was no change in how you performed the previous year. And you got a really good manager saying, oh, you did this really well last year. You can come to them and say, hey, look, in 2019, you gave me a really good review on this aspect of my job, and now you're dinging me. I feel like I've only gotten better, if anything. Why the change? But make them explain that to you. Make them justify that to you. You could use it also if you got a new boss mid-year and they really ding you and they say, hey, look, I know you're a different person. You have different opinions and different analyses, but the way my old boss reviewed my work, they gave me really good rating. I've been doing the same work. The quality of my work has not changed, and I see that you're lowering my score. Why? Right? Because you could make the argument that if there's a different expectation, a new person comes in and has a different expectation, that should have been communicated to the employees before you get something like a performance evaluation of like how your job is being done. Identify specific concerns in the evaluation and use specific examples. Right? So if they talk about how you handled some project last March, you can say, hey, let's talk about that specifically. Right? Here's what I did, here's how I problem solved this, here's how this happened, here's an email from a vendor saying, hey, you did a really great job, why am I being marked for very low on this section, right? You can think the more specific you get, the better in that review period. You might request a copy of your position description as it appears in your file, right? So in the contract, you just look up. It's very simple. You go to HR and you say, hey, can I make an appointment to view my file? Right? They'll give you some options, and you can go in on a lunch break or after work or before work and go in. They'll sit you down at a little computer. You can look at your file, and anything you want to look at in your file, you can say, hey, can you print this out? And then you can look at it later. So if you go in there and look at your position description, then you can really see like when was the last time this was updated, right? And you can use that in the evaluation process. Prepare your rebuttal statement, which should include supportive documentation. So one thing that I would say about this is if you go into your meeting with your boss, the input meeting, your goal is to get the original evaluation amended. Right? So I would hesitate from going in and saying, hey, I've got this rebuttal prepared and I want to present it to you and tell you why I think your evaluation is flawed. What's that manager going to do? Oh, you've got a rebuttal? Great. Here, what I'll do is we'll take that rebuttal and we'll put it in your file for you. I've already got that right. It's in the contract. That's not my goal. My goal is to get the original document changed because I think it's flawed, right? So you can write a rebuttal and use it as reference, but I would hesitate to reference the fact that you have a rebuttal or to show them like, oh, I've got my rebuttal right here. Because then they're just going to take the easy way out and they're say, oh, that's the remedy here. Well, I'll do a favor for you. I'll take this rebuttal and I'll put it in your file. No, it's not a favor. It's a right that you already have in the contract. During the meeting, sometimes you feel like, you're talking to a brick wall and you may get frustrated. You may feel talked down to sometimes. Some managers can be quite condescending, judgmental, jerky,
Yes.
right? It generally does not help you to lose your cool. Right? It's always better to keep cool and have a manager lose their cool. That is, if it's a very toxic relationship, that's the best thing that can happen, right? Because then you've got witnesses to a bullying type of environment, right? If tensions rise and you're yelling at each other, then people can say, oh, well, they don't like each other, they're fighting or they're arguing, right? If you're losing your cool and the manager stays cool, that's really not good for you. Because then they can add things like, oh, you're being unprofessional, the employee's being a bully, they could go after you for that kind of behavior. So even though sometimes it may be challenging, try to keep it cool, not get too heated. There's a way to object to things, to challenge things that are in evaluation without being challenging or being hostile. It's the difference between assertive and hostile. We should be assertive always and hostile almost never. Sometimes we're strategically hostile, but that's a different scenario. Again, identify specific areas of concern, provide supportive documentation. If you have any correspondence, written correspondence throughout the year that tell you you're doing a great job or you're doing something right, that maybe have to do specifically with something you're being critiqued on in an evaluation, bring those, right? Print out copies. Even if it's from the manager themselves. Say, hey, look, I don't understand. You yourself said, I did great work, and then now you gave me a bad evaluation on this aspect. Please explain that to me, right? And the last bullet point here, request for reasonable and appropriate adjustments to be identified areas of concern. I would not shy away from specifically saying what you want in that evaluation. Right? I think it's not helpful if you say, I want it to be more fair, or I want it to be better. I want it to be more reflective of my work, right? Point to specific things, like maybe there's a sentence that you think is just off the mark, it's unfair. You say, I want that sentence removed from the evaluation. That's what I'm seeking. Or, I think you should add something like, right, or write out the sentence for them, right? Be very specific. I think it's much more helpful to the person that you're talking to when you're very specific about what it is you're asking for. Sometimes they're like, well, what do you want? If we tell them exactly what we want, probably going to have a better chance of getting that. This goes through what we talked about already, right? Can you file agreements? Yes and no. We can file on the process, but not on the content. It's 10 to 1. At this point, I think we'll stop for a Q&A of our own and take it from there. I think that's the end of the substance. Does anybody have any questions about specifics or any examples?
Yeah. I've been here on campus for 24, going to 25 years. For the past 10 years, I started tracking my, those numerical assessment, those 1s, 2s, and 3s.
Right.
So for the past 10 years, I've had consistently been rated 1s and 2s. I just had a new boss just about a year ago, and then marked me down to 3s and 4s. And I requested for a meeting, and I said, how come for the past 10 years that I've recorded, I've consistently been rated 1s and 2s. And then she said, this guys who knows who the lady is. It said, no, it's just the way I am. I don't rate you, I see you as meeting standards. And and then I requested to have it explained further. How can I perform in a function that I can go back and get back my ratings for the past 10 years, because for me, because I chart my rating, I take pride, on getting all those ratings. That's why I have a little Excel spreadsheet with the years and who rated me and the ratings for each of those categories. I see ones and twos and suddenly at the last year, I see threes and fours and then, for someone who's looking at statistics can easily see, that year there's a spike in the thing. I tried to explain and then I tried to request for, well, these people are different, that's why they rated you this, but it's me who's rating you and this is how I see you, period.
Right.
I can do with that.
It's tricky. Again, this goes back to it's a subjective process, right? And different people are going to have different, when you have inconsistency in management, you're going to have very inconsistent evaluations for the same work being done by the same person. For instance, you've been doing, say you're in that classification for 10 years, and over that time you've had 4 different bosses.
Mm-hmm.
And it's assumed that with experience through the 10 years, that the experience you've gained makes you just that much better, because you've been doing something for 10 years. You can be better than when you had been doing it for just 1 year, right? So let's just assume that you didn't suddenly become a bad worker. You just were on the regular trajectory of getting better with experience. The fact that those 4 different bosses, you're going to get a very different evaluation scores from them is just proof of a subjective process, and that we shouldn't, like I said at the beginning, at San Francisco State, the president came in and said, I want to really make evaluations meaningful. And so I've reviewed a number of them, and I see a lot of managers just putting out there, it's opposite, 5 is the best, right? Giving people all 5s. Well, nobody's perfect. And so for people to really grow in their development, in their career, in their profession, they need useful feedback. And it's not useful for someone to just get perfect scores on everything. It may make them feel good, but it's not really helping them become a better employee. So I want all the managers that did this big training, I want all the managers to go and really evaluate how you're rating people. Well, that year, the scores dropped significantly. People that were used to getting all 5s, now we're getting 3s and 4s. They were very personally offended. So I've been doing this same work, the same quality of work. What's going on here? Why are you doing this to me? Right? And we had to remind people, this is a subjective thing. Don't let the manager, or the institution in this case, have that much power over you to make you think you're worth less this year than you were last year, because it's just a recalibration of how they're doing things, right? And it's a subjective process. And absent the going for an IRP based on performance, I got all 5s last year and all 4s this year, or the other way around. Besides me kind of like, oh, I like that, my boss thinks I'm doing a good job. There's no real difference that it's making in my career, in my job. Just going in my file and whatever. But I think going back to your specific example, you could go in and you could have that input meeting and say, I understand you're a different person. I take pride in my work. I take pride in that good work being reflected in my evaluations. I'm used to this kind of rating. You're a different person. I think it's unfair for you to have different expectations than an older boss without communicating those expectations to us previously, right? Because then that gives me an opportunity to do the work how you want it to be done, right? So if you want it different than what the old manager, how they wanted it, I need to know that, right? So this first year, you could try to get your scores bumped up if you really want to fight about each score. But I think then, more importantly, if in the future, you'd say, listen, I used to get 1s and 2s, now I got 3s and 4s. I'm doing the same work, your expectations are different. Communicate your expectations to me now so that I can get back to 1s and 2s in subsequent evaluations. But again, it's kind of why there's if people had grievance rights on the content of evaluations, we'd be filing grievances left and right because there's so much, it's so subjective, there's so much disagreement about assessments of performance and of quality of work and work product. That consider again.
If you want me to run a marathon, you gotta let me get into stretching a little bit more in preparation.
Yeah.
Right, exactly. Any other questions? All right, well, thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Have a good rest of your day. Have a good weekend. And I've sent out some communication, but just to keep this on people's minds, in May, the bargaining teams are coming to our campus. Right? So the chancellor's office and our bargaining team bargain at different locations. We kind of share the responsibility or opportunity. In May 6th, 7th, and 8th, they will be here. Last time they bargained in this very room. They did. They did. Right. And we had a picket and we stretched around here and we yelled and we chanted and it was really fun. So we're probably going to do some kind of rally on one of those days. And the other days we'll be having observers come. So if you want to come in, sit in on negotiations and watch and see how it's done, we would love to pack the room with our folks. So that's May 6th, 7th, and 8th.
Okay, very good.
Cool.